Steve Smith, one of PR's research fellows in urban studies. And if you follow our website, you know that I write on crime and criminal justice issues. Today we're joined by a distinguished panel to my right and your left. But before I introduce them, I'd like to talk a minute about the state of crime in California. But in deference to Nina, the district attorney of Modoc County, I wore my Modoc County tuxedo, which if you've been there, is a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt, or white dress shirt, rather. My dad was from Modoc County, and he met my English mother there. So kind of a weird connection to the other Steve who spoke today. It's my pleasure to moderate this afternoon's panel discussion of reforming criminal justice to put victims first. It doesn't take an expert in crime statistics to understand California has been experiencing increasing crime. A crime rate that has accelerated in the last 5 years to the point that California has become a national crime outlier, as well as an unreported crime rate that is even higher. Beginning in 2011, crime and the operation of the criminal justice system in California has been shaped by many forces. The legislative changes began with AB 109, the so-called Public Safety Realignment Law, enacted in 2011, followed by voter-approved ballot measures that you're all familiar with, the infamous Prop 47 in 2014, Prop 57 in 2016, as well as numerous acts of the California legislature and executive administrative decisions by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, our governor, and some of which you will hear more about this afternoon. Those changes have been four-pronged and have had the effect of decriminalizing crime, decarcerating dangerous inmates, delegitimizing law enforcement, and defunding the criminal justice system. While the defund movement has lost momentum, its effect on morale, retention, and recruiting has been lasting. As a result, more Californians are dead, have been sexually assaulted, are the victims of traumatic injury, and more property has been stolen than if all of the legislative and public policy effort of the last 12 years had not occurred, and we simply wound back the clock to 2011. Another thing has happened. Victims and preventing victimization are no longer the political priority. This is a reversal of a policy of putting victims first that began in California over 50 years ago in 1990 when Crime Victims United was founded by one of our honored speakers' mother, Harriet Salarno. Today, you will hear from three distinguished individuals whose personal and professional lives have been shaped by victimization and the fight to keep Californians safe. With us are Placer County District Attorney, the Honorable Morgan Gire, Modoc County District Attorney, the Honorable Nina Salarno, and retired Brigadier General of the California National Guard, Robert Spano. I'd like to begin with General Spano, who has a deeply personal story to share, follow with Modoc County District Attorney Nina Salarno, who, if you notice, shares the same last name as Harriet, who founded Victims United, and finish with current Placer County District Attorney Morgan Gire, who has served as a prosecutor here in Sacramento, where he was the Assistant Chief's Deputy and was then appointed and then elected District Attorney in Placer. After that, hopefully, we'll have some time for the audience. So with no further ado, I'd like to open with General Spano. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Everybody hear me okay in the back? Excellent, great. Well, I'm just going to add one little caveat to what I was going to talk about this afternoon, just based on the discussion that I've been participating in with everybody else this afternoon. And that is that I came to realize that the story I'm going to tell you, it actually spanned literally just about my entire military career, where I became a brand new second lieutenant in the Army in May of 1984, and then retired just a couple of years ago. And so the person that committed the crime in my family did it in 1984 and got out of prison the same year I retired. So I just realized that while I was sitting here today doing the math. So I'm just going to tell you a little story as it pertains to crime in California. Me being a lifetime Californian, born and raised in San Francisco. My parents were born and raised in San Francisco. Went to Balboa High School where they met and raised their family. My brother and sister all grew up down in the San Francisco Bay Area. And on December 10th, 1984, my Aunt Mary DeAugusta, the loving sister of my grandfather Salvatore Consilla, was brutally murdered in her home in San Francisco. The killer was Michael Leon Grant, a 32-year-old married man that had befriended my Aunt Mary, and on that day decided to make sexual advances towards my Aunt Mary. And when the sexual advances were thwarted, he then went into a rage, cut her throat, hit her with a fire poker, and then doused her body with lighter fluid and fled the home. He was arrested after committing the crime, ultimately convicted of second-degree murder, and remained incarcerated until August 2022. In August 2022, he was granted parole and was ultimately paroled back to San Francisco, if you could believe that. The same city he committed the crime, and the same city where a number of my Aunt Mary's grandchildren still work and live in the vicinity of where he was paroled. And then on top of that, he's currently, from what I understand, and communicating with the parole office down in San Francisco, living somewhere. Of course, they won't tell me where, and I really don't want to know exactly where. But I just want to make sure he's following the terms of his parole. And so far, so good. But he is literally living, we estimate, about 20 minutes from my mom and dad. And my mom is now in her 80s, and she's very close to the age of where my Aunt Mary was murdered. So we both, during the parole hearing in August, or prior to August 2022, when he was finally released on parole, we went down, we read statements, we went before the parole board hearing. There was about 20 parole board hearings that day. I was number 17 on the docket. And I got down there, and just like throughout my career, always prepared for a mission of this type of sorts. And came to realize as I was sitting there all day long listening to like I said, I was 17 on the docket, the types of crimes that people were most of them were from the in this case we're on the prisoner side, but I came to realize the type of violent crimes that throughout my life I'd never been exposed to, where people were actually now getting released for these violent crimes. And I sat there, and for a while there, you're sitting there as the empathetic person that I feel that I am, and you're sitting there and you're kind of empathizing because there's grandchildren of these murderers, and they're going up and they're saying their piece on their grandfather, and then they're one by one they're saying this, and then when it comes to the victim side, the grandfather of the murder victim is now speaking, and then every single person thereafter. And you come to realize, the power that the victims still have in this case. But it's still, I felt thwarted by the advocacy that was taking place, for the actual prisoner. And so I sat there that day, and we said our piece. My mom said her piece as well. She did it via Zoom. And ultimately, like I mentioned, Michael Leon Grant was paroled from prison, and he's now since been paroled to San Francisco. And so my message today is where is the advocacy, and where is everything in there for the victims and for the victims' families? And we just didn't feel like it existed. The stories I heard of some of my cousins that actually went to the parole hearings and sat across from the members of the parole board, in which the San Francisco District Attorney said that, well, we feel that this prisoner has met the terms of their incarceration, and so we do not oppose them being released and advocate for the parole. And there was nothing at all set up at all for the victims. When they brought up the fact that, we still live in San Francisco, will he be paroled to San Francisco? They didn't have answers to those kind of questions. On and on and on. There was nothing at all. Nothing at all. There was more representation for the prisoner in this case. And so ultimately, we all come to find out he was paroled, and he was paroled to San Francisco. So like I say, my message today is really about advocacy of victims. And my cousin, Anna Pavarello, who I know was good friends with your mother, that was my Aunt Mary's daughter. She was the biggest advocate. Her husband, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, we bonded in that sense. And for year after year, she would send the letters out. Hey, he's getting ready to get paroled again. We got to write the letters. And I still have them at home, all those letters. So I feel like this is for me, just like I have a lifetime of service, my military career, this is a lifetime of service for victims advocacy. So I thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Bob. I would be remiss if I didn't call to your attention a guest in the audience today. Mr. Carl Olson is sitting in the middle of the room. Carl, if you could just wave. And so Carl and I were classmates at Sacramento State in the 80s. We both interned in that building across the street. Bob and I were classmates at Wentworth Military Academy before my time at Sac State. Bob went on to become a general, and I became a cop. So you see where the IQ points went. But what's remarkable about victims is that I knew Bob when this happened, and he carried it inside of him, and I knew Carl when his sister was murdered, and he carried it inside of him, and I just cannot imagine. So, with that, I would like to introduce to you Nina Salarno, the District Attorney of Modoc County.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the nod to Modoc. I appreciate that. We are pretty remote. And to you, one, for your service, but I did know your cousin as well, and a passionate advocate for victims, and obviously throughout your family. My name is Nina Salarno, and more importantly than being the Modoc County DA, which I'm very honored to be, I'm a victim of crime. In 1979, my oldest sister, Katina Salarno, was stalked, executed, and left for dead at the University of Pacific in Stockton. She was murdered by her boyfriend, and at that time in California, we had no stalking laws and very little domestic violence laws. My family, I was born and raised in San Francisco, always very proactive. My dad was in politics. We always supported public safety, but we found ourselves thrust into a criminal justice system that didn't care about victims and didn't care about public safety. My mother, who is 91 years old now, was going to join me today, but had a doctor's appointment. She did something that I think is more incredible than any human I've ever met. She took the pain of my sister's murder and decided to change the criminal justice system. In 1990, she founded what was known as Crime Victims United. It became the first victims advocacy group to advocate on a legislative and political level. Although she came up and down to Sacramento only to have doors shut on her many times trying to improve the voice of victims, she caught the eye of one very powerful and sympathetic man, President Ronald Reagan. And at 12 years old, I stood next to my mom testifying in front of his task force and in front of the president about the treatment of victims of crime. And that started the crime victims movement throughout this nation. Crime Victims United's mission is dedicated to enhancing and promoting public safety throughout California, to balance the criminal justice system, and to ensure the rights of victims. And that's what we have done since 1990. But it hasn't been easy. Not in any state, but especially here in California, and especially here in recent years. Because what's happening in California is we have taken the word tolerance to a new level. While I'm an ardent supporter of tolerance for race, religion, creed, for people's individual thinking, when we start tolerating criminal behavior and start excusing criminal behavior, and we start lessening accountability by so-called criminal justice reforms, we have now taken a beautiful golden state that now has one of the highest crime rates in the nation, which correlates also to the highest homelessness in the nation. And those are things that we need to reverse. But it is up to us, not the people sitting in that building over there, because I don't know what ivory tower most of them sit in, but they don't have a clue what it is like to worry about sending your child to school because you're worrying if you're going to get a call of an active shooter. I have a daughter in college, to worry every night what it's like for her to get home safe from her college classes at night so she's not sexually assaulted or killed. I speak as many parents do. It is the most frightening time in California right now. And it is because of these so-called criminal justice reforms. But we can, and we do have the means to change them. Everybody's heard about Proposition 47, probably the biggest lie to the voters in the state of California when they named it the Safe Schools Act. It actually derailed California. Not only did it downgrade drug and theft crimes to misdemeanors, it downgraded some of the worst crimes in California. It downgraded domestic violence as no longer a serious and violent felony. Rape of an unconscious person is no longer a serious and violent felony. Assault on a peace officer is no longer a serious and violent felony, and the list goes on. And what this has done is led to thousands of people being resentenced and released from state prison who cannot live peacefully in our society. It has been nearly impossible for us to lock up even low-level offenders. And the reason why that is important is because there is a direct correlation in California. When Proposition 47 passed, homelessness shot up in California, and we now lead the nation in homelessness. And as a district attorney, and my fellow district attorney Morgan, who's amazing, can tell you, the fact that we cannot prosecute people for theft, we can't get them into drug courts or veteran courts or get them some help that they may need, even outside the county jail, because we have no ability to keep them accountable. We have attempted to address these issues through the legislature, only to have it fall on its face. So therefore, a group of very brilliant district attorneys, law enforcement, and people throughout the state, now headed by Anne-Marie Schubert, the former Sacramento County District Attorney, have a statewide ballot initiative that is going to address these issues. On the ballot, you will see the Homelessness, Drug Addiction, and Theft Reduction Act. And that title is actually true, unlike what has come out of the legislature. This would increase the penalties for people who repeat and engage in theft and add new laws to address increasing problems of smash and grabs that cause so much damage, so much loss, so much hurt to our community. Another important antidote to California's accountability problem is cash bail. And although oftentimes bail is misunderstood and is always under attack, bail is probably one of the most important components in our criminal justice system as a victim, because for the victim, it ensures that we get our day in court. Currently, when they tried the very failed experiment here called zero bail in California, we now have more warrants for some very dangerous people out on our streets because they just let them out with no accountability. And what bail does, when addressed right, set reasonably, and worked for between all the components of the criminal justice system, it protects public safety. Zero bail jeopardized public safety, and it still continues. Just look at Los Angeles County, which has a zero bail policy. Yolo County in 2023, District Attorney Grise did a study that showed that these policies increase crime in our communities, on our families. Those released without bail during that 1 year period were rearrested a total of 163% of the times. They committed 200% more violent crimes. And that is a small category in California. And the number one crime committed in those 200% was domestic abuse upon either an intimate partner or a child. We also, unfortunately, and I do know the Tibbetts family very well, experienced the horror of zero bail and zero accountability when Mary Kate Tibbetts was raped, murdered, and set on fire by a parolee with a record bigger than the 15th floor here, who was let out on zero bail 2 years ago. That family should have never had to suffer but for these failed policies. Yet our elected leaders continually attack those, and we, the voters, have had to fight the reforms on the backs of the victims. Another reform that is extremely important that we worked very, very hard to defeat in our legislature last year, but unfortunately it is a 2-year bill and coming back, was are trying to lower and make less accountable life without the possibility of parole. As a prosecutor will tell you, to get life without the possibility of parole or death takes the worst of the worst, truly. These are people that not only murdered, as murder is horrible enough, but they have raped, they have sodomized, they have murdered children, they have murdered elderly, they have lit people on fire, they have committed torture. These are the kind of people that Senator Cortese seeks to allow to be resentenced and released back into our communities. His bill, SB 94, was in fact defeated. Crime Victims United headed that. But it sends a chilling message that our legislature didn't defeat it outright, but rather just made it a 2-year bill, which means we will have to mount a campaign again along with our partners in law enforcement and the district attorney's office, just to keep the worst of the worst behind bars. I'm sure many of you know Mark Klass. Mark Klass is a dear friend of mine, father of Polly Klass. Literally 2 days ago, he called me in tears. The killer of Polly Klass is up for resentencing on April 10th of this year. This is a man that kidnapped a young girl out of her own home, brutally sexually assaulted her, and murdered her. He should be on death row. I sat next to Mark the day after Governor Newsom was elected in Governor Newsom's office, because he called us both to his office, when the governor told Mark that he was putting a moratorium on the death penalty, after he promised in his campaign that he would not do that. How Mark is a much greater human being than I am. How he held his composure, I will never know. But I did remember him looking exactly at the governor and saying, "My heart was devastated and shattered the day Polly was murdered. You've done worse to me now." And he walked out of the governor's office. And now Mark has to face and fight a resentencing of one of the worst in California. That is the issue with the lack of accountability and the tolerance of criminal behavior that we are facing here in California. We also see it to the very innocent young victims, and that is the fentanyl crisis that we are facing. And I'm going to steal a little thunder from Morgan Gire, probably one of the greatest prosecutors we have. He was the first in all of California to prosecute somebody for murder for fentanyl dealing. And that set a precedence. I'm going to let Morgan talk a little bit more of that, but because of Morgan Gire, almost every county in California, the district attorney now gives a warning upon a drug conviction or drug arrest that if you deal fentanyl or illicit drugs, you can and will be prosecuted for murder. I'll let you guess which counties don't give that warning, but they're very few. So it just so happens that the statewide initiative working to fix Prop 47, the Homeless Drug Addiction and Theft Reduction Act, also addresses fentanyl. And again, I'm sure Morgan will talk a little bit more of that. But these are the kind of things that we are pushing as victims, as public safety advocates. We want to return common sense and accountability. We've given up on the legislature, so we have to come to you, the voters, to help us educate other people out there, to help us get common sense accountability so that we can have safe streets, so our children can go to school safely. And that's what we are attempting to do. And it's my honor to be here today. It's my honor to speak about a little bit about this, to sit among great crime victims advocates, public safety leaders. And I just ask that each and every one of you carry this message back. Because unfortunately, the one thing about being a victim of crime and about violent crime knows no boundaries. It doesn't care about your socioeconomic status. It doesn't care what color your skin is or what religion you are or whose mother and father you or child you are. It affects everyone. And together, we need to protect our state and our community. Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce the Honorable Morgan Gire, District Attorney of Placer County. You may notice we're a little heavy on district attorneys right now and short on legislators, and you can imagine why they don't want to be in front of you all right now.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Had we known there could have been legislators, we would have declined the invite. I take that back. There's about 4 I like over there. But thank you very much. Again, my name is Morgan Gire. I'm the Placer County District Attorney. I'm honored to be up here with Bob and Nina, and thank you to PRI for allowing me to participate today. If you'll notice, there's sort of a common theme. I overheard the previous panel, and there's a common theme of accountability that is lacking. When you have an imbalanced legislature, surprisingly, you get imbalanced laws, and then all of a sudden you see imbalanced communities. And we have done that over the last decade plus. We have slowly dismantled any thoughts of accountability through the laws that have been passed. And Bob and Carl, those are real life examples. And what we have seen predominantly from the legislature over the last 5 or 7 years is a very sophisticated approach to dismantle the back end of cases. And you'll hear myself and other prosecutors never refer to victims as getting closure, because closure is somewhat of a myth. What our goal is to, with dignity, at least shepherd you through the criminal justice system so that you can then grieve and heal properly without the distractions and the trauma that is inflicted by a cold and sterile criminal justice system. I've been a prosecutor my entire working life. It's the only legal job I ever wanted. It's the only legal job I ever had. I heard my good friend and former colleague Tin Ho earlier say he was a politician, and I cringed. The P word is a prosecutor, not politician. I'm in the only elected office I ever want, and I'm the only one will ever hold, and it's the only job because I get to be, as Bob said, I get to be an advocate on behalf of victims. And there are fewer and fewer advocates for crime victims and survivors left, particularly each year as we see these statutes passed. But one of the things that we have seen, and I bring this up so that you are all aware, is the attack on the back end of cases, forcing crime victims, survivors, and their next of kin to relive the trauma by providing opportunities for those who have not earned the chance at redemption to be granted one. And I always say, mercy and leniency without accountability does no one any good. If someone has earned the opportunity for redemption, then they need to demonstrate how they've earned it. There are those who have committed such heinous crimes that they have forever forfeited their right to redemption based on the choices they made on a particular day. And as we have seen, the legislature is hell-bent, pardon my French, on providing everyone in a one-size-fits-all approach, everyone an opportunity to get out, including those who still represent a very serious danger to the community. And one of the things that I think the legislature has been working so hard to do is impose restrictions and requirements on prosecutors and law enforcement to operate with more transparency. And on that level, I agree. I think your government should operate with transparency. The problem is that it does not apply to the state agencies. That sense of duty and obligation and transparency doesn't apply to the executives at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It doesn't apply to the architects of Prop 57, who grant the ability to CDCR to award credits for literally doing nothing. For simply breathing the oxygen inside a California state prison, you receive about 5 days off your sentence. Not through rehabilitation, not through education, not through vocation, not through drug treatment, not through the traditional hallmarks of rehabilitation and redemption that we would expect someone who did a wrong in society would have to undergo to earn their chance. It is granted, it is rewarded to them for doing nothing. And it got to the point where there were about 20 of us elected DAs that had to sue the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation because they were granting early releases. There were 2 individuals who were sentenced to prison from Placer County that I had to learn had been released from prison when they committed 2 murders in Sacramento County. I had to read it in the newspapers along with presumably the survivors and next of kin of their victims. And my stomach sank. And fortunately, we had a really good investigative journalist in the Sacramento and Placer County areas who ran with this story. I demanded information as an elected district attorney, which I thought would get me somewhere. It didn't. I demanded information as to how and why they were releasing these individuals. Tell me what these people did to earn their release. They were sentenced to prison for committing violent acts against people, and the next thing you know, they're out. And I demanded to know why. And you know what I got? Crickets. I got nothing. And 6 months of me writing letters to the secretary, of me going on the news at any moment I could to say this has to stop. At least they listened to an investigative reporter who asked the right questions and got a response. And you know what we found out? They don't know how or why they're giving those early releases. It is literally the roll of the dice and a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think the theme of our conversation here today is that one-size-fits-all approach does not work in the criminal justice system. Every defendant is unique, every victim is unique, every set of circumstances is unique. And the only way to determine and to differentiate between those who have earned the shot at redemption and those who haven't is to roll up your sleeves and look at what they've done and to ask hard questions. And when you don't do that, you see what we have when those very dangerous and violent inmates are released. So what do we do? Because I hate it when I listen to people and we all end with a, well, that was uplifting, right? What's our message? What's the silver lining? Well, I think we're seeing a change, believe it or not. And I was having this conversation earlier. I think the legislature is starting to feel the pressure. We saw last year, and I'm a legislative nerd. I follow it. I've been on the California DA's Association Legislation Committee for about 16 years. I've testified, I think this last year, 4 or 5 times in front of both the Assembly and Public Safety, Senate Public Safety Committees. Last year, fentanyl was one of the big topics. It hit our community in Placer just as hard as it hit other places. We saw a new category of victims with the fentanyl crisis, fueled by the lockdown from COVID, when we had teenagers who were missing out on all of the firsts and lasts of their lives. They were missing moments. They were missing funerals and weddings and graduations and proms. They were already self-isolating. They were those who were inclined to maybe participate in risk-taking behavior. Raise your hand if you were a teenager who never participated in risk-taking behavior. I almost saw a hand and you put it down immediately, right? Right? And we saw young teenagers dying, literally the first time they were experimenting. And we were able to track these pills that they were buying, these non-pharmaceutical street lab smuggled into our country and distributed by our cartel drug distribution networks into our communities, and our teenagers were dying. We had a separate battle with those who were battling substance abuse and addiction, and that is a very different front, equally important, that requires our attention. But this was a new category of unsuspecting victims, and we knew we had to do something about it. We were able to discover who was selling in our community, and we were able to prosecute them. And there are no easy laws to try and prosecute someone who sells a substance to a victim who willfully takes something. But, and you'll hear all of us prosecutors refer to fentanyl as both overdoses for those who are battling addiction, but poisonings for those who are taking it unsuspecting. And I always give this example and why you hear us refer to it as poisoning. If I walk into a bar and I order a shot of whiskey, and the bartender pours me a shot of cyanide and I drink it and I die, would you say I overdosed on cyanide? No, you'd say I'd been poisoned, and you would expect that bartender would go to jail. And that's exactly what we had, and that's exactly what we did. And I appreciate Nina's comments. We weren't the first to file. We were the first in Placer County to obtain a conviction in the state of California for a fentanyl-related murder. We also got the third one as well. Riverside County has the second. It's a trend. I don't take that honor lightly. It's not something we wanted. It's certainly not something that the family of our victims deserve to have bestowed onto them. But it's something that we have to do to restore accountability into the state of California. Just like we have to hold our thieves, our organized retail thieves accountable, we have to hold people accountable. And I always say accountability comes in many different forms. For some, that's treatment. For some, that's an opportunity at redemption. And for others, that is to separate them from society for as long as we possibly can. And that is something that my fellow prosecutors and I are very good at doing. So we will continue to fight, but we need your help. I will echo Nina's words. The best way to affect change in that crazy white building over there is for an informed citizenry to say we've had enough and we demand and deserve change. And you saw it last year when the Public Safety Committee in the Assembly got shamed into hearing bills that they completely disregarded. Fentanyl, human trafficking, they completely shot them down without giving very good ideas and argument, and they were told even by the governor that they had to go back and they had to listen to the people. And we may not have gotten as far as we want, but that's how we get change. It's because the people in this room demand it, and that's how we will see change. And we will see, I am convinced in November, we will see accountability restored, at least as it relates to retail theft, with the passage of the Reduction of Homelessness Act. So thank you all very much for your time today. It's my pleasure to be here.